Babes in Arms is a 1937 musical by Rodgers and Hart. It has some of the most memorable singles in the American songbook. Songs like Lady's a Tramp, My Funny Valentine, When or Where, these are just a few. The script was written in 1950 to a much blander, much less controversial book, but we're going to focus on the original book as intended. The plot, in short, is about a bunch of children whose parents, retired vaudevillians, leave for a trip and are left to raise a certain amount of money, expectedly by working what they call the work farm. They don't want to work there and convince the sheriff to allow them to take 2 weeks to raise money and put on a show instead. Val, our idealist protagonist, takes the lead as director and actor. He meets Billy, a hobo free spirit whom he falls in love with, and goes head-to-head with Lee, a rich aristocrat southerner. The plot then thickens as characters grapple with varying opinions on social change tactics, racism, corruption, and the meaning of freedom and liberty. This show completely changed the expectations of musicals as a whole. By using cynical and overtly political plot lines and songs, Rodgers and Hart forced the elite who could afford the shows to visually experience these struggles in the thick of the Depression. The play also shows us the ideal belief that change is found through resistance, not revolution. Where is all this seen in the play, you ask? Let's get into it. The politics portrayed in the show are those of New Wave Jewish liberalism. Jews historically, at least since European emancipation, have had a tendency to hide their Jewishness as much as possible out of fear of being scorned or marginalized or seen in any way as a drain on society. Many Jewish characters, and also real people of the time, were whitened to eliminate the perception of ethnicity in Jewishness. In fact, Rodgers and Hart were the first musical theater figures to not change their birth names. Irving Berlin, for example, changed his name from Israel Balin, Al Jolson from Asa Yolson, George Gershwin from Jakob Gershowitz, etc. This is largely because they had already been integrated into American society as second-generation immigrants with less Jewish-sounding names, and thus are placed in a position where they don't fear making noise quite as much as others might. During the 1930s, with the rise of anti-Semitism and Nazism in Europe, American Jews feared being perceived as warmongering for personal gain, so they decided the best way to fight was through silence and invisible societal integration. We'll see later what activism they did do, which in turn would help themselves as well. In Babes in Arms, while refraining from using any openly Jewish characters, the play manages to fully convey the new and becoming secular Jewish liberal ideology. We see a show where the heroes fight for freedom and equal opportunity, the belief that hard work is the path to success, and specifically fight for Black civil rights, which, again, we'll get to later. With mass immigration of Jews fleeing the pogroms of Europe and in the face of the Depression, American Jews gripped onto a rising ideology that believed not only in personal responsibility, but a responsibility in helping the other too. FDR is famously quoted saying, "The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much, it is whether we provide enough for those who have too little." This idea that we must unionize, fight for one another, and resist the systems at hand led to massive numbers of Jews not only joining revolutions and protests, but also leading them. In the play, the children are faced with an unstable political situation, and they understand that the only way to combat it is through action, or in this case, acting, and putting on a play, which, in a very meta way, is also exactly what Rodgers and Hart are doing. Think about that. The work farm represents the current capitalist system, which allows for the children to have food and education, but on the other hand, it also represents a loss of independence and self-sufficiency. Billy the Free Spirit is the representation of typical Depression-era American self-reliance. She opposes the work farm and encourages the boys to put on the play in pursuit of their greater goal, personal liberty. Lee, who represents the conservatives, opposes their suggestion to unionize and put on a show, claiming they are no match for the powerful government, and that, in his words, you all amount to nothing. In the end, the kids yell him out of the room with the belief that they must take personal responsibility and fight for their rights. Hooray! During the Depression, this concept of personal responsibility was so internalized in the Jewish community that despite knowing that joblessness and poverty wasn't actually their fault, they were still so overwhelmed with such internal shame, they wouldn't permit themselves to even take welfare, as it was perceived as a handout in their eyes. They believed in it for others, just not for themselves. Again, out of fear of being perceived a burden to society. In contrast to Billy, who had self centered goals for her desire for revolution, Val, and also Jewish liberalism, believed in organized activism to help others and not just himself, and thus they unionize and fight for one another. This fight leads us to our next topic. The play in large has a theme of ethnic blindness and equality. Billy, covering the nose of some of the implied Jewish characters, calls the ethnically diverse group 100% American descendants. She does that to ridicule the older generation for ethnic purist ideals. While this is only a very subtle nod toward fighting anti Semitism, covering the noses, the play does not shy away from speaking out directly against black racism. By the 1930s, vaudeville had largely become irrelevant, and segregation in regular theater productions has, for the most part, returned. In Babes in Arms, two characters, Ivor and Irving, who are two dancers in the show the kids are putting on, face racism from Lee the producer and controversial opinions on the handling of that racism within the play. Val doesn't seem to see a reason why the brothers shouldn't perform, while Lee claims they absolutely cannot because of the color of their skin. He states that he will not endorse the show if they go on. In this heated discussion, Lee tells Val he should feel the same because Val is just as Southern as he is. In return, Val outs him by reminding him they're both only 1/8 Southern, undermining his elitist ancestral nativism. Later, Val and Billy discuss the issue. Val, again being an idealist, believes under no grounds should the boys not have a right to perform, while Billy, who believes in protecting oneself first, claims taking them off the show would be better for the greater good. She claims by not letting the boys perform, they can keep the show running and prevent them all from having to work on the work farm, which nobody wants. This entire discussion is incredibly parallel to the real world of that time. To get the majority vote and then be able to make real change, Roosevelt is quoted saying, "If I come out for the anti-lynching bill now, they will block every bill I ask Congress to pass to keep America from collapsing. I just can't take that risk." The Jewish liberals found this compromise completely inappropriate and then not only joined, but founded and ran major social justice organizations. Even Hammerstein himself served as vice president of the NAACP for a time. Val, like the Jewish take on the matter, rejects Billy's compromise and actually punches Lee in the jaw, losing the funding for the show in an act of resistance for his black friends. All this progressive activism can't go without mentioning the sign of the times inner racism that still exists in this play and its structure. Though Val is fighting for black rights and equality, at no point do Irving and Ivor get a say on the matter, nor do they get to make any decisions at all. They, in fact, don't even get to be a part of the group's meetings, being written off as quote unquote late. The white characters debate and decide the fate of the black characters. Additionally, there's a subplot where Val believes Billy is in love with Lee, and by pushing the brothers on stage to perform, Val is also using them as a vessel of dominance over Lee, rendering the brothers just a pawn in the white character's struggle for power. The black characters are defined by their race throughout the show. They don't get three-dimensional personalities. Their trope is their race, and their purpose is to give white people a chance to fight over their rights. Linguistically, the book is problematic too, giving Irving and Ivor broken English in a vaudeville dialect, calling white characters who should be peers miss or other subservient language. This separation actually creates segregation within the theater storytelling, rather than the external segregation we're used to. In the 1930s Depression, Broadway was dying out. Musical theater was losing its place in the fight to stay relevant. What Babes in Arms did different was use the stage as a platform not only for blissful entertainment, but as a way to vocalize and animate themes of social significance. They also realized that to do so, they must put much more effort into the plot and book quality, something which was generally neglected at the time. By making a political play be about a play with political themes, they're using an act of resistance to commit an act of resistance. Because art is resistance, proving that musical theater has more functions than sheer entertainment. Musical theater inherently has a meta-ness of self-awareness to it. It knows it's acting outside of reality. Because of this, a song can be understood by the audience as not only related to the plot, but to a larger external topic. The act of singing and playing music is larger than the plot, so the lyrics can be too. This new use of musical theater format revives the genre and gives it new life to keep growing and thriving. I could go on forever about the feminism in this play and its place as it relates to New Wave feminism due to the Depression, or about the out of left field finale's significance, but there's only so much time on Earth and it's 2:30 a.m. Regardless, between the racial topics of the play, the New Wave Jewish liberal ideals ingrained in the plot, and the sheer innovation of the musical theater format, Babes in Arms is a crucial, formative musical in the history of musical theater, civil rights, Jewish integration, and American history as a whole. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did and you want to learn more, I highly recommend reading the book that I based this video off of. It's by Andrea Most. It's called Making Americans, Jews in the Broadway Musical. The chapter is the Babes in Arms chapter, if you want to go only into that. It's incredibly eye-opening and really informative. It's a fascinating read, so I highly recommend it. Either way, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for listening throughout this entire thing, and I hope it was engaging. That's it.